You've found the Stealth Podcast. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Subscribe and comment to support us. Thanks. Let's begin. My weekend getaway to Salem turns into a nightmare when I meet a friendly local who offers to show me secret parking spots around town. What starts as helpful van life advice becomes a deadly game of cat and mouse when I realize he's hunting me for a twisted ritual that's been happening in Salem for centuries. My name is Elijah Winters, 28 years old, originally from Burlington, Vermont. Life had become predictable working as a graphic designer. So 6 months ago, I converted a Ford Transit into my home and started freelancing remotely. Freedom was intoxicating, waking up to different views, meeting new people, exploring places I'd only seen on Instagram. My sister Naomi thought I was having a quarter-life crisis, but she didn't understand the claustrophobia of apartment living that had been suffocating me. October seemed like the perfect time to visit Salem, Massachusetts. The town's eerie history and Halloween preparations created an atmosphere you couldn't find anywhere else. I'd arrived yesterday, finding parking at a crowded lot near the Salem Witch Museum. The transit wasn't exactly inconspicuous with its solar panels, but I'd gotten good at urban stealth camping, blackout curtains, minimal light usage, and parking between larger vehicles whenever possible. The first day had been perfect, wandering cobblestone streets, photographing historic buildings, and soaking in the macabre decorations adorning every storefront. That evening, I stopped at a local pub called The Cauldron, where I met Marcus. Tall, with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes that crinkled when he smiled, he claimed his family had lived in Salem for generations. When I mentioned my van, his interest peaked immediately. "Tourist spots are terrible for overnight parking," Marcus said, leaning in conspiratorially. "The police here are vigilant about van lifers, especially during October. But I know several spots off the beaten path where you'd be left alone." He pulled out his phone, showing me satellite images of secluded areas perfect for stealth camping. One spot particularly caught my attention, a clearing near an abandoned property on the outskirts of town, invisible from the main road, but with an easy exit route. By midnight, following Marcus's meticulously detailed directions, I was navigating narrow roads into increasingly isolated woodland. The spot was perfect, flat ground, no streetlights, no nearby houses. As I settled in for the night, a text from Marcus arrived. "Hope you found it okay. Sleep well. There's so much more of Salem I'd love to show you tomorrow." I smiled, grateful for local knowledge that most travelers never access. If only I'd known what Marcus really had planned. Morning arrived with an unsettling silence. No birds, no distant traffic, just the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I checked my phone. No signal. Unusual, since I'd had service last night when Marcus texted. I made coffee on my portable stove and stepped outside to take in my surroundings in daylight. The spot was more isolated than I'd realized, surrounded by dense woods with only a narrow dirt track connecting to the main road nearly half a mile away. About 50 yards from my van stood what appeared to be an abandoned house, Victorian in style, with weather-beaten clapboards and broken windows. Marcus hadn't mentioned how close the building would be. Curiosity pulled me toward it despite an inexplicable sense of dread tightening my chest. The front door hung partially open on rusted hinges, revealing a dust-covered foyer. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside, flashlight illuminating peeling wallpaper and scattered debris. In what must have been the living room, I discovered a disturbing tableau: 5 wooden chairs arranged in a perfect circle around a table covered with faded markings. Old photographs hung crookedly on the walls, their subjects' faces methodically scratched out. My heart hammered as I noticed something else: recent footprints in the dust, not mine. Someone had been here recently, perhaps even that morning. Back at the van, I found a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper, a rough map of Salem with 5 locations marked with red X's. At the bottom, a handwritten note: "Visitors like you have enriched our town's history for centuries. The hunt begins at sunset." My hands trembled as I recognized Marcus's handwriting. What had seemed like friendly hospitality now felt sinister. My instinct screamed to leave immediately, but when I turned the ignition, my engine sputtered and died. Popping the hood revealed my worst fear. Critical wires had been cleanly cut. Professional sabotage. My toolbox might help with temporary repairs, but it would take hours. Checking my phone again, still no signal. The sun hung low in the sky, maybe 3 hours before sunset. Whatever hunt Marcus had planned, I needed to be gone before it began. As I rummaged frantically through my tools, a notification somehow broke through. A local news alert about the 5th disappearance of a solo traveler in the Salem area this month. Darkness fell faster than I anticipated. My attempts at repairing the van proved futile. These weren't random cuts, but strategic damage designed to strand me. With sunset approaching rapidly, I gathered essentials into my backpack: flashlight, multi-tool, water bottle, power bank, and a kitchen knife that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. The woods had transformed as daylight faded, everyday shadows morphing into menacing silhouettes that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. A twig snapped somewhere behind me. Then another, closer this time. Someone was circling my position, ducking behind my van. I peered underneath to see a pair of boots approaching from the direction of the abandoned house. "Elijah," Marcus's voice called out with disturbing cheerfulness. "The others have arrived. We're ready to begin." Others? My blood ran cold. This wasn't some solitary predator. This was organized. I remembered the 5 chairs in the house, the 5 marked locations on the map, the 5 disappearances mentioned in the news alert. The tradition dates back to 1692, Marcus continued, his voice closer now. Not all Salem's victims were burned as witches. Some were sacrificed differently. He appeared at the van's rear door, no longer the friendly local, but something terrifying, still smiling, but his eyes reflecting nothing but emptiness. In his hand gleamed an ornate dagger with symbols etched into the blade. Behind him stood 4 figures in dark clothing, their faces obscured by antique-looking masks. "We need 1 visitor for each point of the pentagram. You're our final guest of honor." I bolted into the woods, abandoning any pretense of negotiation. The beam of my flashlight bounced wildly across trees and undergrowth as desperate adrenaline propelled me forward. Behind me, Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor or humanity. "We've done this for centuries, Elijah. No one escapes the hunt." Most horrifying was how they didn't rush after me immediately. They followed at a measured pace, confident in their knowledge of the terrain. These woods were their hunting ground, and they knew exactly where I would run. My lungs burned as I crashed through underbrush, disoriented but driven by primal fear. Glimpsing lights through the trees, I changed direction, hoping to find a road or house. Instead, I emerged at the edge of a clearing where an impossible sight awaited. A gathering of people in dark robes surrounding a massive bonfire. At its center stood a wooden structure distinctly shaped like a pentagram, for bodies already bound to its points. As the assembled crowd turned toward me with synchronous precision, I realized with bone-chilling clarity that I hadn't randomly stumbled upon them. I'd been herded here deliberately. The crowd parted as I backed away, creating a path for Marcus and his 4 masked companions. "The visitor arrives precisely when intended," he announced to approving murmurs. My escape route had been an illusion. Every direction I ran would have led here. With sickening clarity, I understood what the abandoned house and my disabled van truly were. The beginning of a corridor designed to funnel prey toward this clearing. I wasn't the first to follow this exact path of panic. Scanning desperately for any escape route, I spotted a gap in the human perimeter where the firelight didn't quite reach. I feinted left before diving right, rolling under a surprised robed figure's attempted grab. Shouts erupted behind me as I plunged back into darkness, this time with dozens of footsteps crashing through the underbrush in pursuit. The hunt had escalated from 5 predators to what sounded like 50, their voices calling to each other as they coordinated to surround me. A highway appeared ahead, salvation in the form of headlights and normal civilization untouched by whatever madness had consumed Salem's hidden population. Waving frantically, I leaped into the roadway as a truck approached. The driver's horrified expression as he swerved provided a moment's confusion until I turned to see what he was avoiding. Not me, but the wall of robed figures that had materialized at the forest's edge, visible enough for the driver to spot, but retreating before his headlights fully illuminated them. The truck didn't stop. No one would, not this late on a desolate stretch of Massachusetts highway. Worse, I'd revealed my position to my pursuers. A sharp pain suddenly bloomed in my shoulder, a small dart protruding from my jacket. My legs weakened almost immediately, the tree leaned swirling into abstract patterns as I fought to remain conscious. As my knees buckled, I heard Marcus's voice nearby. The outsider always runs to the highway. 2 centuries, and they never disappoint. I awoke bound to the final point of the wooden pentagram, the massive bonfire illuminating faces now unmasked in the circle around me. With dawning horror, I recognized people I'd encountered throughout Salem yesterday. The friendly barista, the museum guide, the shopkeeper who'd recommended local restaurants. The sacrifice isn't just about blood, Marcus explained, now dressed in ceremonial robes more elaborate than the others. It's about betrayal, the warmth of welcome followed by the terror of understanding. As the knife descended toward my chest, my final coherent thought was that my sister had been right. I should have stayed in Vermont. The knife never plunged into my chest. Instead, Marcus dragged it lightly across my forearm, collecting blood in an ancient-looking chalice. "Death comes later," he whispered. "First, you witness." The 4 other victims, who I had assumed were dead, began to stir and scream against their bonds as robed figures approached, each with similar blades. This was to be prolonged, ritualistic bleeding rather than quick execution. The collective suffering somehow seemed worse than a quick death. One by one, my fellow captives had their blood collected, their screams mixing with chanting from the crowd. Through tear-blurred vision, I noticed something odd. Marcus checking his watch repeatedly, looking increasingly concerned. The ritual had timing requirements, apparently. When he stepped away to consult with another robed figure, I spotted my opportunity. The ropes binding my right hand had loosened when I'd been repositioned for the blood collection. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but unmistakable. Confusion rippled through the gathering. This clearly wasn't part of the ceremony. Marcus's face contorted with rage as he shouted, "Complete the ritual. We have minutes only." As attention focused on accelerating the ceremony, I worked my hand free and reached for the knife they'd carelessly left on a nearby stone. The next moments were chaos, me slashing wildly at anyone who approached, cultists scrambling to either finish the ritual or flee from approaching law enforcement. I managed to free 2 other captives before smoke bombs suddenly burst throughout the clearing, not thrown by cultists but by tactical units swarming in from all directions. Flashlight beams cut through smoke as officers in FBI jackets secured the area. As a female agent helped me toward a waiting ambulance, she explained, "We've been tracking a series of disappearances along the eastern seaboard for years. Always near historic towns, always during October." The devastating truth emerged during my hospital debriefing. The agent placed photographs before me, Marcus and several other cultists, all with their faces crossed out. These individuals were found dead 3 weeks ago in Rhode Island. Someone has been assuming their identities. The real horror wasn't that Salem harbored some centuries-old cult. It was that someone had methodically studied those legends and recreated them. Most chilling was the final revelation. My chance meeting with Marcus at the Cauldron had been orchestrated months ago when I'd posted my Vanlife route on Instagram. The killer had selected victims long in advance, studying our habits, preferences, and personalities to craft the perfect lure for each of us. I sold my van the following week. The freedom of the open road now felt like exposure rather than liberation. Sometimes at night, I still receive text messages from unknown numbers containing just 5 words. "The next hunt awaits you." Police insist they captured everyone involved, but I can't shake the certainty that I was saved not because the FBI was clever, but because someone wanted me alive, a survivor to spread the story, ensuring future travelers would arrive in Salem with that delicious edge of fear that makes the hunt more satisfying. Most disturbing of all, tourism to Salem has increased since my story made national news. People are drawn to the danger, never suspecting they might be auditioning for next October's ritual. I'm going to tell you about the worst mistake I ever made, parking my van for what I thought would be a peaceful night in Gloucester, Massachusetts. The fishing town seemed perfect for a quick stopover, but I discovered something in those abandoned quarries that still haunts my dreams. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. Something that hunts at night. My name is Natalie Reeves. I'm 28 years old, and I'm originally from Austin, Texas. I'd been living the van life for about 16 months, converting my Ford Transit into a cozy mobile home After quitting my soul-crushing job as a pharmaceutical sales rep, my Instagram account, Nomad Nat, had gained a decent following, and the ad revenue helped supplement my savings. I'd zigzagged across the country, spending most of my time in national parks and beachside towns, documenting everything along the way. My plan was to spend autumn exploring New England's coastal regions before heading south for winter. Gloucester wasn't even on my original itinerary. I'd been staying in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, when another Vanlifer I'd befriended online suggested I check out Cape and scenery. The quarries are incredible, Marcus had messaged. Locals don't bother you if you park at the abandoned ones overnight. I'll send coordinates. The photos he shared showed crystal clear blue water surrounded by towering granite walls. It looked magical, especially with the fall foliage reflecting on the water's surface. What Marcus didn't mention was why locals avoided certain quarries after dark. I arrived in Gloucester late afternoon, stopping first at a local market for supplies. The elderly cashier chatted amiably until I mentioned heading toward the quarries. Her smile faltered. "Stick to the public ones, dear," she said, handing me my change. "Some of those abandoned ones have unstable edges. Bad accidents over the years." I assured her I'd be careful, attributing her concern to typical small-town protectiveness toward outsiders. I followed the GPS coordinates Marcus had sent, driving down increasingly narrow roads until I reached a chain-link fence with a large gap where someone had cut through. A faded sign warned, "Danger. No trespassing, quarry property." Beyond the fence, a rough dirt track led to a spectacular view, a massive quarry pit filled with eerily still turquoise water. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the granite walls, which rose at least 60 feet from the water's surface. I parked my van near the edge, but at a safe distance, setting up my portable table and chair to enjoy dinner with a view. As twilight descended, I noticed odd markings carved into some of the rocks, symbols that looked old but not ancient, geometric patterns, and what might have been letters from an alphabet I didn't recognize. I snapped photos, thinking they'd make interesting content for my followers. As darkness fell completely, the quarry transformed. Without moonlight, the water turned black as oil, reflecting nothing. The temperature dropped dramatically, and an unusual silence settled over the area. No insects chirping, no distant traffic, nothing but the occasional splash from the quarry. I told myself it was just water settling against the rocks, but each sound seemed deliberate, almost rhythmic. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, "Get out now." Seconds later, another message, "They come at night." Before I could respond, my phone lost signal completely. That's when I heard the first scream, a sound so human yet so distorted that it raised every hair on my body. It came from the water. I scrambled into my van, locking the doors and peering out through the curtains. The rational part of my brain suggested the scream was probably a fox or some other animal. They can sound disturbingly human, but something deeper, more instinctual, told me this was different. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept for emergencies and debated whether to start the engine and leave immediately. The dirt track I'd driven in on wasn't meant for night driving, with sharp turns alongside steep drops into smaller quarry pits. Driving out now might be more dangerous than waiting until morning. I decided to stay put, keeping the flashlight and my bear spray close. Sleep was impossible. Every few minutes, another splash would break the silence, each one sounding closer to my van than the last. Around midnight, I noticed a faint glow emanating from the quarry water, not reflective, but something luminescent moving beneath the surface. Bioluminescent algae, perhaps? But this was a freshwater quarry in Massachusetts, not a tropical ocean. The glow moved with purpose, tracing patterns similar to the carvings I'd photographed earlier. At one point, it concentrated in one area, intensifying until I could see it clearly through my window, a pulsing blue-green light about 20 feet from shore. Then the light abruptly vanished, plunging everything into darkness again. The silence stretched for nearly 10 minutes before I heard it, a wet, dragging sound moving across the granite. Splash drag, splash drag. Something was pulling itself out of the water. My heart thundered in my chest as I slowly shifted position to see the quarry's edge. The moon had finally risen, casting weak silver light across the scene. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the stone rim and the black water beyond. Then movement caught my eye. a pale form hauling itself onto the rocks, water streaming from its body. It wasn't human, but it moved with terrible intelligence. I suppressed a scream, accidentally knocking my water bottle to the floor with a loud plastic clatter. The creature's head snapped toward my van, and I got my first clear look at it, humanoid but wrong, with an elongated torso, limbs bent at unnatural angles, and skin like wet paper. Its face was the worst part, mostly featureless except for a wide, lipless mouth and large, unblinking eyes that reflected the moonlight like polished coins. For one terrible moment, it stared directly at my window, as if it could see through the curtains. Then its mouth opened, stretching impossibly wide, and it emitted the same scream I'd heard earlier. More splashing sounds followed, and to my horror, I realized the first creature wasn't alone. 3 more pulled themselves from the quarry, their pale bodies gleaming wetly in the moonlight. They gathered at the water's edge, making chittering sounds as they communicated with each other. One pointed toward my van, and they began moving in my direction with a horrible lurching gait. My trembling hands fumbled for my keys in the dark. Starting the engine would alert them to my exact location, but I had no choice. Before I could turn the key, my van suddenly rocked violently as something heavy landed on the roof. The metal groaned under the weight as whatever it was began moving across the roof toward the front of the van. Claws, or perhaps long fingers, scraped against the metal, testing, searching. I heard sniffing sounds, like an animal tracking a scent. Then it moved toward the skylight I'd installed above my bed, the one window I couldn't cover completely with curtains. I slid silently to the floor between the front seats, making myself as small as possible. A face appeared at the skylight, another of those terrible, nearly featureless faces, this one pressing against the glass so hard I feared it might break. Its mouth moved, forming words without sound. Then, horrifyingly, my phone buzzed again despite having no signal. The screen lit up with a new message. "Let US and Nomad, now we see you." Ice flooded my veins as I stared at my phone screen. How did they know my online handle? The creature at the skylight pressed harder against the glass, causing a small crack to form at one corner. The others had reached the van now, their pale hands sliding across the windows, leaving viscous trails like snail mucus. One began rocking the van gently from the side, testing its stability. Another scratched at the back doors, its claws making a sound like nails on a chalkboard. They were coordinating, trying to find a way in, or perhaps attempting to tip the vehicle over. I had seconds to decide. The quarry's edge was only about 30 feet away. If the van went over, it would sink like a stone with me trapped inside. Starting the engine now seemed like my only option. As I lunged for the driver's seat, my phone buzzed again. "Others came before you. All joined US." Accompanying the message was a photo, a waterlogged driver's license belonging to Marcus, the Vanlifer who'd sent me the coordinates. The expiration date showed it had been issued just 3 months ago. This wasn't some elaborate prank or hallucination. These creatures had lured me here specifically, using Marcus's information. With shaking hands, I jammed the key into the ignition and turned. The engine roared to life, momentarily startling the creatures. I slammed the van into reverse, tires spinning on the rocky ground before finding traction. The creature on the roof lost its balance, sliding down the windshield with a horrible screech. Its face pressed against the glass for one terrifying moment before falling away. I didn't look to see where it landed, focusing instead on the narrow dirt track as I reversed at dangerous speed. One wrong move would send me plunging into a smaller quarry pit alongside the path. The headlights illuminated more of the pale creatures emerging from other water-filled quarries as I drove. They seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, their bodies dripping as they pulled themselves onto land. Some moved with that same lurching gait, while others crawled rapidly on all fours like insects. All turned toward my van as I passed, some reaching out with impossibly long arms. My phone continued buzzing with messages I didn't dare read. The radio, which had been off, suddenly switched on by itself, filling the van with static that occasionally broke into words, "Stay home." I finally reached the main road, tires screeching as I turned toward town. In my rearview mirror, I could see dozens of the creatures gathering at the quarry entrance, their pale forms clearly visible against the dark trees. They made no attempt to follow onto the main road, instead forming a semicircle just beyond the broken fence. As I accelerated away, my headlights swept across a figure standing in the road ahead, a soaking wet man with vacant eyes and blue-tinged skin. I swerved to avoid him, nearly losing control of the van. In that brief moment as I passed, I recognized his face from Marcus's profile picture. He shouldn't have been there, couldn't have been there, yet he raised one dripping hand in greeting as I sped past. I drove straight to the Gloucester police station, bursting through the doors around 1 a.m., hysterical and babbling about creatures in the quarry. The desk sergeant, a weathered man named Officer Kelly, listened to my story with an expression that shifted from concern to recognition to resignation. When I finished, he sighed heavily and opened a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. "You're not the first," he said quietly, spreading photographs across the desk. Different quarries, different years, but similar reports. Swimmers gone missing, night fishermen who never returned, and most recently, 6 Vanlifers who had disappeared in the past year after reportedly heading to the abandoned quarries. "We call them the Deepers," Officer Kelly explained, his voice barely above a whisper as if he feared being overheard. "Been part of Gloucester folklore since the quarries were first dug in the 1800s. Most locals think they're just stories to keep kids from swimming in dangerous areas." He showed me yellowed newspaper clippings dating back decades. Mysterious drownings, night watchmen reporting, men with fish features, quarry workers refusing to take shifts after sunset. Official reports always list the deaths as accidents or suicides. Easier than admitting the truth. He looked directly at me. They hunt by using people they've already taken. Familiar faces, trusted voices. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message contained a video. Despite Officer Kelly's warning not to look, I pressed play. The footage showed the interior of my own van, filmed from my perspective at the dining table where I'd sat for dinner. But I had no memory of recording this. The camera panned across the quarry view, zooming in on the water's surface where something dark briefly broke through before submerging again. Then the camera turned, showing my own face smiling at my phone camera. Except my eyes were wrong, flat, vacant, reflecting light like the creature's eyes. The video ended with my voice saying coordinates that weren't the ones Marcus had sent. "They're trying to use you now," Kelly said grimly. "They've seen your followers, your influence. You're valuable as bait." He explained that the creatures somehow accessed digital information from their victims, using it to lure more people to the quarries. That's why the disappearances have increased recently. Social media makes it easier for them. He wrote down an address on a slip of paper. "There's a woman who knows more than I do. Marina Fisher. She's been studying them for years after her brother disappeared. Go there now, and don't stop for anyone, especially if they look familiar." I left the police station with Marina's address, driving through deserted streets as rain began to fall. Every traffic light turned red as I approached, forcing me to stop repeatedly in the empty town. At one intersection, I noticed a figure standing motionless on the corner, another pale form with that wrong, lurching posture. It didn't approach, but simply watched as I waited for the light to change. My phone's navigation system suddenly rerouted, trying to direct me back toward the quarries. I turned it off, relying on the written directions to Marina's house on the outskirts of town. When I finally reached the address, I found a small cottage surrounded by a peculiar fence, not chain link or wood, but strands of copper wire strung between posts, with small glass bottles containing dark liquid hanging at intervals. Wind chimes made of bone and metal clinked softly from the porch. I approached cautiously, the hairs on my arms rising when I noticed symbols carved into the doorframe, the same symbols I'd seen at the quarry. Before I could knock, the door swung open, revealing a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and silver-streaked red hair. "You've brought them with you," she said matter-of-factly, looking past me to where water had begun pooling unnaturally on her bone-dry driveway. Quickly inside. They can't cross the threshold. Marina's cottage was a strange combination of scientific laboratory and occult workshop. Tables covered with geological samples and water testing equipment stood alongside shelves holding ancient-looking books and jars of unidentifiable specimens. Maps of Gloucester's quarry system covered one wall, red pins marking sites of disappearances. "They're not supernatural," she explained, handing me a towel and hot tea. "Just extremely adapted and extremely old. They were here long before the quarries, living in underwater cave systems." The quarrying just opened more access points to the surface. She showed me coarse samples from the quarry stone containing fossilized remains that looked disturbingly similar to what I'd seen. My brother was a marine biologist, Marina continued, pulling out a leather-bound journal. He came to study unusual phosphorescent activity in the quarry water. His notes document the early stages of what happens to people they take. She opened the journal to pages of increasingly disturbed handwriting, describing physical changes, sensitivity to light, skin softening, an unquenchable thirst for water. The final entries were nearly illegible, the handwriting deteriorating along with the writer's humanity. "They don't just kill people," Marina said softly. "They transform them, make them like themselves." My brother sent these notes before he changed completely. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the roof. Water began seeping under Marina's door despite the copper wire protections, forming small puddles that moved against gravity, collecting into a larger mass. "They've never come this far from the quarries before," Marina whispered, genuine fear in her voice for the first time. "They want you badly." She hurried to a back room, returning with what looked like camping equipment. "There's a way to stop them following you, but it requires direct confrontation. I've developed a compound that disrupts their biological processes, essentially dehydrates them rapidly, but it must be deployed directly at the main quarry, what they consider their home." Marina explained that folk tales about stopping the heart of evil things held a kernel of truth. The creatures had a central hub, the deepest quarry where they gathered and where transformed humans were taken to complete their metamorphosis. If we could deploy her compound there, it might not kill them all, but would drive them deeper underground, cutting off their access to the surface. "It's a suicide mission," she admitted. "I've never had anyone willing to try it who they didn't immediately capture." She looked at me intently. "But they want you whole. They'll take you to the center themselves." The plan was desperate but simple. I would return to the main quarry where I'd first seen them, appearing to surrender. Marina would follow at a distance with the police. Once the creatures took me to their central hub, I would deploy the compound, essentially powerful desiccant bombs combined with a bioluminescent disruptor. I carried the devices in a waterproof backpack, along with an emergency breathing apparatus. "They'll sense something's wrong," Marina warned as we prepared to leave. "Move quickly once you're inside." As if confirming her fears, my phone screen lit up with a final message. "We see her too. Both join us below." We drove separate vehicles back to the quarry, Marina following at a distance with Officer Kelly and two other policemen who believed enough to help. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from trees and rocks as I parked in the same spot as before. This time, I didn't wait for the creatures to find me. I walked directly to the quarry's edge and called out, "I'm here." The water remained still for several long minutes before beginning to glow with that same otherworldly luminescence. The surface broke as pale forms rose slowly, their eyes fixed on me. One creature, the one I recognized as having once been Marcus, stepped forward, extending a webbed hand in greeting. "Take me to where the others are," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. Marcus's transformed face twisted into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. He gestured toward the water, then pointed at me and made a diving motion. I nodded, removing my shoes as if preparing to enter willingly. The moment I stepped toward the water's edge, multiple hands shot out, grabbing my ankles and pulling me in before I could deploy any of Marina's devices. The icy water shocked my system as I was dragged downward into absolute darkness, deeper than the quarry should have been. My lungs burned for air when suddenly we entered a vast underwater cavern with air pockets. Bioluminescent organisms covered the walls, illuminating a horrifying scene. Dozens of half-transformed people were gathered in the chamber, some still recognizably human, others nearly completed into the pale, elongated creatures. They turned as one when I was brought in, making those same chittering sounds I'd heard before. In the center of the chamber was what appeared to be a pool of concentrated bioluminescence, blindingly bright compared to the dim glow elsewhere. This was their heart, I realized, the biological center of their colony. With the last of my strength, I broke free from my captors, tore open the waterproof backpack, and activated all of Marina's devices at once, throwing them into the glowing pool before the creatures could react. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The bioluminescence flared painfully bright before beginning to dim, the liquid seeming to crystallize and crack. The creatures screamed, that same horrible sound I'd first heard from the quarry, as their skin began to dry and flake. They rushed toward the water exits, abandoning me in their panic. I spotted an ascending tunnel marked by different bioluminescence and swam for it desperately, my lungs nearly bursting. The last thing I remember is breaking the surface in a different quarry pool and seeing Marina's flashlight scanning the water before everything went black. I woke 3 days later in Gloucester Hospital, suffering from hypothermia, water inhalation, and numerous cuts and bruises. Marina was there, looking exhausted but triumphant. "It worked," she said simply. "The quarries are going dry." Officer Kelly confirmed that water levels in all the connected quarries had dropped dramatically, as if draining through newly opened fissures in the earth. No more pale figures had been spotted. Whether they had died or simply retreated deeper underground, no one could say for certain. Of the transformed humans, including Marcus, there was no sign. The official story became about underground blasting causing shifts in the water table, nothing more. I sold my van as soon as I was released from the hospital, unable to bear the sight of it or the memories it contained. Before leaving Gloucester forever, I visited the main quarry one last time with Marina. The water level had dropped at least 30 feet, revealing ancient carvings on the previously submerged walls, the same symbols I'd photographed near the surface. "They've been here since before European settlement," Marina noted. "Native Americans knew to avoid these places." As we turned to leave, my phone buzzed one final time. The screen showed no message, no number, just an image. Crystal clear water with sunlight filtering through it, taken from below looking up, as if someone wanted me to see how beautiful their world could be. I dropped the phone into the quarry and never looked back. My name is Ethan Blackwood. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Baltimore. After a painful divorce and losing my job at an advertising firm, I decided to embrace the Vanlife lifestyle. I converted an old Mercedes Sprinter myself, installed solar panels, a compact kitchen, and a surprisingly comfortable bed. For 6 months, I'd been traveling up the East Coast, documenting my journey on a modest blog. The freedom was intoxicating, but money was getting tight, which is why I headed to Salem in October. Tourist season meant opportunities for odd jobs and decent spots to park without drawing attention. Salem in autumn was exactly what you'd expect. Historic buildings adorned with Halloween decorations, streets filled with tourists snapping photos of witch-themed attractions. I found work helping a local brewery set up their Halloween festival booth. The owner, Marcus, was a burly guy with tattoos running up both arms who paid in cash and didn't ask questions. The first few days went smoothly. I'd work during the day and park overnight behind an abandoned strip mall on the outskirts of town. The security cameras were broken, and the property seemed forgotten by everyone except occasional teenagers looking for a place to smoke. On my 4th night in Salem, I noticed another van had parked about 50 yards from mine, a black Dodge Ram conversion with tinted windows and Massachusetts plates. Something about it made me uneasy, but I reminded myself that vanlifers seek out the same spots. I decided to be neighborly and walked over to introduce myself. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a woman around my age with deep auburn hair and intense green eyes. "I'm Vanessa," she said with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just passing through on my way to Maine." We chatted briefly about good parking spots and the upcoming Halloween festivities before I returned to my van. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about Vanessa felt off. Her van was too clean, too new for someone who seemed experienced in this lifestyle. Around 2 a.m., I heard her van door slide open. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked through my curtains. In the dim moonlight, I saw Vanessa dragging what looked like a heavy tarp toward the woods behind the strip mall. She disappeared into the tree line for 15 minutes before returning empty-handed. My heart raced as I pretended to be asleep when she glanced toward my van. The next morning, she was gone before sunrise, but something shiny caught my eye where she'd been parked. A delicate gold bracelet with the name Jessica engraved on a small plate. I shouldn't have picked it up. I shouldn't have turned it over to see the tiny engraved message. "To Jessica, all my love, Dad." I shouldn't have noticed the small rust-colored stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. But I did all these things, and then made the decision that would change everything. I pocketed the bracelet and drove into town to use the library's computer. The local news website had a small article from 2 days earlier about a missing college student named Jessica Winters, last seen leaving her part-time job at a cafe in neighboring Peabody. The photo showed a smiling blonde wearing the exact bracelet, now burning a hole in my pocket. I spent the morning debating what to do. My instincts screamed to drive far away from Salem. But could I live with myself if I didn't report what I'd seen? Eventually, I drove to the Salem Police Department, a red brick building with Halloween decorations in the windows that seemed mockingly cheerful. Officer Ramirez took my statement, his expression shifting from polite boredom to intense focus as I described Vanessa and the bracelet. He disappeared with the jewelry in an evidence bag, returning 20 minutes later with a detective, a tall woman with silver-streaked black hair who introduced herself as Detective Olivia Chun. "Mr. Blackwood, where exactly are you staying in Salem?" Detective Chin's question carried an accusatory edge that made me regret coming forward. I explained my Vanlife situation, which only deepened her suspicion. "So you have no permanent address, no local connections, and you just happened to witness suspicious activity involving a missing person case." She took my driver's license, photographed my van, and told me not to leave town. As I walked out, I overheard Ramirez murmuring something about 5 missing women in 3 months, and all with similar appearances. My blood ran cold as I recalled Jessica's photo, slim build, blonde hair, early 20s, just like dozens of tourists currently flooding Salem. That night, I couldn't return to the strip mall. It felt too exposed. Instead, I found a quiet spot behind a self-storage facility where several RVs were already parked. I was scrolling through news articles about the missing women when headlights swept across my windshield. A black Dodge Ram conversion with tinted windows pulled in 2 spaces away. My heart nearly stopped. It couldn't be coincidence. I killed my lights and slid down in my seat, watching as Vanessa stepped out, stretched her arms casually, and walked toward the storage facility entrance. She punched in a code, the gate opened, and she disappeared inside. I knew I should call Detective Chun, but something held me back. Fear, maybe, or the growing suspicion that I was being set up somehow. Why would Vanessa reappear so brazenly after I'd found the bracelet? I decided to follow her at a distance. The storage facility was poorly lit, with security cameras that looked as neglected as those at the strip mall. I tracked Vanessa to Unit 237, hanging back as she rolled up the door and entered. After counting to 60, I crept closer, hearing the muffled sounds of metal objects being moved around inside. Through the partially open door, I glimpsed plastic sheeting covering the floor and walls, and what looked like medical equipment. My phone suddenly vibrated with an incoming call, Detective Chun. The sound echoed in the silent corridor, and the noises from Unit 237 instantly stopped. I backed away quickly, but not quickly enough. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, her expression unnervingly calm as she spotted me. "Ethan," she said softly, "I've been hoping you'd find me again." She stepped forward, revealing surgical gloves on her hands and small specks of something dark on her forearm. "People like us understand each other, don't we? Nomads. Invisible." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes, revealing something that made my skin crawl. "Would you like to see my collection? I think you've earned that much." "My collection is special," Vanessa continued, stepping closer. "Most people wouldn't appreciate it. But you're different, aren't you? You notice things." My mind raced. The storage unit behind her, the missing women, the blood-stained bracelet. I needed to keep her talking while finding an escape route. The corridor stretched 40 feet in either direction, with no visible exit except the way I'd come in. My phone was still vibrating in my pocket. Detective Chin wouldn't give up easily. "How many are in your collection?" I asked, taking a subtle step backward. Vanessa's smile widened. 7 now. Jessica made 7. And they're not in my collection yet. They're becoming my collection. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just killing these women. She was preserving them somehow. Vanessa seemed to enjoy my horror, her eyes gleaming with perverse excitement. "Want to know the best part?" She whispered conspiratorially. "I don't choose them randomly. They're all replacements for her." She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo of a young blonde woman. "My sister. She abandoned me, started a new life, new name. So I find women who look like her, who remind me of her betrayal." The clinical detachment in her voice made me shudder. This wasn't mindless violence. It was calculated, ritualistic revenge against a stand-in for someone else. Vanessa suddenly lunged forward, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "You're going to help me tonight, Ethan. I've chosen number 8, and she's perfect." She pulled me toward the storage unit, the door now wide open, revealing the disturbing space beyond. Surgical tools were arranged neatly on a folding table. Industrial plastic covered every surface. A drain in the center of the floor explained how she kept the place clean. Most terrifying were the 7 large suitcases stacked against the back wall, each labeled with a woman's name and a date. My legs nearly gave out as Vanessa dragged me inside and closed the door behind us. "Please," I begged, "you don't have to do this." Vanessa's expression hardened as she picked up a syringe from the table. "Everyone has a dark side, Ethan. I've just stopped pretending. Now hold still." I knew I couldn't overpower her. She moved with the confidence of someone who had subdued victims before. Instead, I pointed behind her and shouted, "The police." When she instinctively turned, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy metal case, and swung it at her head. She collapsed with a sickening thud, the syringe skittering across the plastic floor. I didn't check if she was breathing before running out and pulling the storage unit door down behind me. My hands shook so badly I could barely dial 911. Dispatchers assured me police were already en route. Detective Chun had traced my phone when I didn't answer her calls. I waited in my van, doors locked, watching the storage facility entrance until flashing lights appeared. For police cars surrounded the area, officers approaching with guns drawn. Detective Chin spotted me and hurried over. "We found your van at the strip mall with blood inside," she said accusingly. "Then you disappear and reappear here? Start explaining." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted by Unit 237. An officer's voice crackled over the radio. "Unit is empty. Repeat, suspect and evidence are gone." Chin's eyes bored into mine. "There's nothing there, Mr. Blackwood. Just an empty storage unit with your fingerprints all over the door." "That's impossible," I stammered, but Chin was already ordering officers to search the entire facility. I followed them to Unit 237, my stomach dropping at the sight of the completely empty room. No plastic sheeting, no surgical tools, no suitcases. Just bare concrete floor and walls, with no sign anyone had ever used the space. "Check the security footage," I insisted. "Vanessa entered this unit less than an hour ago." The facility manager, a balding man in his 60s who'd been roused from bed, shook his head as he reviewed the monitors. "System's been down for maintenance since yesterday," he explained. "But Unit 237 has been vacant for months. Last tenant moved out in July." Detective Chin's suspicion was now unmistakable. "Mr. Blackwood, we found blood in your van that matches Jessica Winter's type. You have no alibi for the nights any of these women disappeared. And now you've led us on a wild goose chase to an empty storage unit." I protested my innocence, describing Vanessa in precise detail, recounting our conversations. "She must have known you were coming," I insisted. "She cleared everything out through another exit." Chin's expression remained skeptical, but she agreed to have officers search the surrounding area while others escorted me back to the police station for further questioning. The interrogation room was deliberately intimidating, windowless, with harsh fluorescent lighting and a metal table bolted to the floor. For 3 hours, Chun and another detective named Morales took turns questioning me about my movements since arriving in Salem. They showed me photos of all 7 missing women, each blonde, each in their early 20s, each vanished without a trace over the past 3 months. The evidence against me was circumstantial but damning. My transient lifestyle, my presence in each town around the time women disappeared, the blood in my van that I couldn't explain. "We're obtaining a warrant to search your online history," Morales informed me coldly. "And we've impounded your van for forensic testing." Dawn was breaking when Chun entered the room alone, placing a laptop in front of me. "We found something interesting on the storage facility's backup server," she said, pressing play on a video file. The footage showed me entering Unit 237 alone, emerging 20 minutes later looking panicked, then making a phone call. There was no sign of Vanessa or her van. "That's been doctored," I protested weakly, but even I could hear how unconvincing I sounded. Chin slid another photo across the table, My driver's license alongside a Massachusetts ID with my face, but the name Daniel Winters. My blood froze as I recognized the last name. Jessica's brother, Chin explained grimly, who reported her missing 3 days ago. Care to explain? I couldn't explain because the ID was a complete fabrication. As I struggled to form words, Chin's phone buzzed. She answered, listened intently, then ended the call with a troubled expression. They finished the preliminary search of your van, she informed me. They found a hidden compartment under the bed. Inside were 7 phones belonging to our missing women, along with jewelry, driver's licenses, and a collection of. She paused, visibly disturbed. Hair samples, labeled with dates and locations. My world collapsed around me as Chun continued. We also found detailed journals describing each abduction and... She couldn't finish the sentence. I felt the walls closing in as officers entered to formally arrest me. My protestations of innocence fell on deaf ears as fingerprint evidence and DNA samples further connected me to each victim. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Prosecutors painted me as a calculating predator who used the anonymity of Vanlife to hunt young women across New England. The evidence was overwhelming. My fingerprints on Jessica's bracelet, the collection of trophies in my van, journals written in handwriting experts confirmed was mine. Despite my insistence, I'd never seen them before. My public defender suggested I plead insanity, arguing that the Vanessa I described was a manifestation of my own dissociative identity. I fired him on the spot. If I was going down, it wouldn't be by admitting to crimes I didn't commit. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before finding me guilty on all counts. As the judge prepared to announce my sentence, a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. A woman with auburn hair slipped in, catching my eye briefly before disappearing into the hallway. "Vanessa!" I screamed, lunging forward only to be restrained by court officers. The judge interpreted my outburst as further evidence of my derangement, sentencing me to 7 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. As they led me away, I caught a final glimpse of Detective Chun speaking with a courthouse security officer, both looking puzzled as they reviewed footage from a hallway camera. 3 months into my sentence at Massachusetts Correctional Institution, I received my first piece of mail, a postcard with no return address. The image showed Salem's famous witch memorial. On the back, in elegant handwriting, "We really are invisible, Ethan. Some of us just better than others. I've moved west, started a new collection. Sometimes I wonder if anyone will believe them either when they try to describe me. Sleep well. V." The postcard came with a newspaper clipping about another Vanlife enthusiast arrested in Vermont for similar crimes. Crimes that continued even with me behind bars. I showed the postcard to guards, to prison administrators, even to my new lawyer, but they all dismissed it as a cruel prank. 2 years passed before Detective Chun visited me in prison. She looked older, more haggard, her once straight posture now slightly stooped. "3 more women have disappeared in Colorado," she said without preamble. "Each matches the profile. Each was last seen near a black Dodge Ram conversion with tinted windows." She pushed a photograph across the table, security camera footage of a woman with auburn hair at a gas station in Denver. "We found no evidence of this woman in Salem during the investigation," Chin admitted reluctantly. "But yesterday, we received an anonymous package. Inside were 7 flash drives containing videos of," she swallowed hard, "the actual murders. The killer's face is visible. It's not you." The revelation came too late. 3 days before Chin's visit, I'd been attacked in the prison yard by the brother of one of the victims. The makeshift knife pierced my liver, causing internal bleeding that prison doctors failed to detect. As Chun explained that proceedings to overturn my conviction had begun, I could feel my strength ebbing away. "Find her," I whispered, my vision blurring. "She'll never stop." The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Chun nodding grimly, determination in her eyes. The last thing I heard was the flat tone of the medical alarm as prison staff realized what was happening. I died an innocent man, another victim of Vanessa's elaborate game, while somewhere in Colorado, she was already selecting her next Vanlife traveler to frame for her growing collection. My name is Cameron Foster. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Seattle, Washington. At least that's where I used to call home before I embraced the nomadic lifestyle. After a brutal corporate layoff and subsequent divorce, I converted a Mercedes Sprinter into a mobile home, complete with solar panels, composting toilet, and a workspace for my freelance graphic design gigs. For the past 8 months, I'd been traveling the country, documenting my journey through a modest YouTube channel that was slowly gaining traction. October found me winding through New England's colorful landscapes, with my next destination being the small town of Rockport, Massachusetts, a picturesque coastal community known for its artistic history and quaint harbor. Rockport seemed perfect for a few days' stay. Charming enough to attract tourists, but not so popular that finding overnight parking would be impossible. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when the infamous paper house caught my eye, a quirky roadside attraction made entirely of newspapers from the 1920s. While filming a short segment outside it, I met an elderly local named Walter who suggested I check out Halibut Point, mentioning a secluded parking area where folks like you sometimes stayed overnight. Beautiful sunrise over the quarry, he'd said with a peculiar smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You'll have the place all to yourself this time of year. Something in his expression made me uneasy, but the prospect of free oceanfront parking was too tempting to resist. I followed Walter's directions, taking increasingly narrow roads until I reached what seemed to be an abandoned ranger station overlooking a massive granite quarry that opened to the Atlantic Ocean. The spot was breathtaking. Jagged rock formations framing the endless blue horizon, autumn foliage providing bursts of crimson and gold against gray stone. No overnight parking signs were visible, and the place seemed genuinely deserted. I carefully positioned my van for the best morning view and set up my portable workspace outside. As sunset approached, I noticed odd markings carved into some of the granite slabs, symbols that looked like crude stick figures, waves, and what might have been tallies or counting marks. I photographed them, thinking they'd make interesting B-roll for my next video. The temperature dropped dramatically after sundown, unusual even for New England in October. My weather app showed no cell service, so I couldn't check the forecast. A thick fog began rolling in from the ocean, obscuring the stars and bringing with it a strange, metallic smell. Around 9 p.m., I heard what sounded like singing, distant at first, then seemingly coming from all directions. It wasn't quite a sea shanty, but something older and more primitive, with no distinguishable words. I told myself it was probably just locals having some kind of gathering nearby, but when I looked out my windows, the dense fog revealed nothing but vague shapes moving in the darkness. Shapes that seemed too tall and too fluid to be human. I was debating whether to start my engine and find another spot when a sharp knock on my side door made me jump. Standing outside was a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, soaking wet despite there being no rain. "Car trouble," she said, her voice oddly flat. "Need to call for help." Something about her was deeply wrong. Her skin too pale, her eyes too still, her clothes plastered to her body as if she'd been completely submerged in water. When I hesitated, she pressed her hand against my window, leaving a smear that looked black in the dim light. "Let me in," she insisted, her voice changing, deepening. "The tide is coming." Behind her in the fog, other figures had appeared, all similarly drenched, all standing motionless. The singing had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence broken only by water dripping from their clothes onto the gravel. I'm not proud to admit I panicked, scrambling to the driver's seat and starting the engine with shaking hands. The woman's expression never changed as I pulled away, but all the figures turned in unison to watch me go, their movements synchronized in a way that made my skin crawl. I drove blindly through the fog, taking wrong turns twice before finding my way back to the main road. In my rearview mirror, I could swear I saw the figures following at an impossible pace, gliding rather than running. My rational mind said they couldn't possibly keep up with a vehicle, but when I pulled into a well-lit gas station in town, my side mirror revealed black handprints all along the van's exterior, handprints that couldn't have been there before. The night attendant, a middle-aged man named Mike according to his name tag, noticed my distress as I burst into the store asking if I could park in his lot overnight. "Had to scare up at Halibut Point, didn't you?" he asked knowingly. When I described the wet figures and the singing, he sighed heavily and motioned me to follow him into a back office. From a filing cabinet, he pulled a worn folder containing newspaper clippings dating back decades. Happens every October, he explained, showing me articles about disappearances in the area, all involving outsiders, all occurring near the old quarry. Local legend says they're the spirits of quarrymen who drowned when the sea broke through in 1892. 26 men trapped by rising water. Some say they're still looking for replacements so they can finally rest. The articles described a pattern I couldn't ignore. Each victim had been found days or weeks later, drowned in freshwater despite being discovered on the rocky shore. Each body had contained trace minerals specific to the quarry's granite composition. Most disturbing were the autopsy details. Water in the lungs that had been there for days before death, as if the victims had somehow been breathing it. They're not ghosts, Mike said quietly. There's something worse. They take you, keep you alive underwater somehow, waiting for the right tide. When the moon and stars align just right, they let you go, but by then, you're one of them. Still walking, still talking, but changed inside. I spent that night parked under the gas station's bright lights, doors locked, researching Rockport's history on my laptop. The quarry accident was real enough, a disaster that had shocked the community and eventually led to the quarry's abandonment. What the official records didn't mention were the strange occurrences that followed. Locals claiming to see their drowned relatives walking the streets on foggy nights, always soaking wet, always trying to lure people back to the water. As dawn approached, I noticed something alarming. Small puddles forming under my van despite the clear night sky. When I cautiously opened my door to investigate, I found seawater seeping up through the pavement, forming rivulets that moved against gravity, circling my tires. Mike appeared with 2 cups of coffee just as the sun rose, looking unsurprised by the water's unnatural behavior. "They've marked you now," he said, handing me a thermal mug. "Won't stop until they get what they want. Tide's highest tonight. Full moon plus the autumn equinox makes powerful pulling magic." He pressed a small object into my palm, a rough stone pendant carved with symbols matching those I'd photographed at the quarry. "Local protection," he explained. "Won't save you completely, but might buy you time to leave town. Drive west, cross running water 3 times. Don't stop until sunset." I thanked him and quickly packed up, noticing with unease that the puddles retreated as the morning brightened, leaving behind crusty white residue that looked disturbingly like handprints. I should have followed Mike's advice immediately, but I made a crucial mistake. I wanted evidence first. My YouTube channel had been gaining traction with urban exploration videos, and documented proof of a genuine supernatural phenomenon could be life-changing. I drove to the local library instead of leaving town, searching through their historical archives for anything related to the quarry disaster. The elderly librarian watched me with increasing concern as I pulled book after book, eventually approaching with a leather-bound journal. "If you're looking into Halibut Point, you should read this," she whispered, glancing nervously around the empty building. Ellis Blackwood's diary. He was the quarry engineer who survived. They don't keep it in the public collection anymore. The journal detailed Blackwood's growing unease in the weeks before the accident. Unusual tides, workers reporting singing from below the quarry floor, tools disappearing only to be found arranged in strange patterns. The final entry described the disaster itself, but with a chilling deviation from the official account. Water came not from the sea, but from below, as if the earth itself was bleeding. The men didn't flee. They walked into it willingly, singing that damnable tune. Only I resisted. Only I saw their eyes change before the flood took them. Blackwood had survived by clinging to granite outcroppings until rescue arrived, but his account was dismissed as trauma-induced delusion. He spent his remaining years claiming the drowned men had found something ancient in the quarry's depths, something that had changed them before the water even reached their lungs. As I photographed the journal pages, I noticed the library had grown unusually quiet. The sunny day had turned overcast, and condensation was forming on the windows from the inside. Each droplet ran downward in unnatural patterns, forming those same crude stick figures I'd seen carved in the granite. When I looked up, the librarian was standing motionless beside a now dripping bookshelf, watching me with vacant eyes. "They're waiting for you at the point," she said, her voice containing a subtle gurgle. "Only 25 replacements found so far. You'll be number 26. She took a step toward me, water squishing in her sensible shoes, a dark stain spreading down her cardigan. I fled the library, clutching both the stone pendant and my camera's memory card. Outside, the town had transformed in the few hours I'd been researching. Though no rain had fallen, every surface glistened wet. Residents moved through the streets with an odd synchronization, all turning to watch my van pass. At each intersection, water ran from storm drains uphill against gravity. My GPS repeatedly rerouted to direct me back toward Halibut Point despite my attempts to navigate westward. When I finally reached the town limits, my engine sputtered and died completely, dashboard lights flashing before going dark. Opening the hood revealed the impossible. My engine compartment was filled with seawater, barnacles already forming on metal components as if it had been submerged for weeks. With no other options, I grabbed my emergency backpack and began walking, following train tracks that led away from town. The protective pendant grew noticeably warm against my chest with each step, and I found myself constantly wiping moisture from my face despite the absence of rain or sweat. After a mile, I encountered a railroad bridge spanning a small river, the first of the 3 crossing waters Mike had mentioned. As I approached it, I heard splashing from below. Looking over the edge, I saw them, dozens of figures standing in the shallow water, their faces turned upward in perfect unison. Among them was Walter, the old man who directed me to the quarry, his clothes still dry while standing knee-deep in rushing water. "We need you, Cameron," he called up, using my name though I'd never told him what it was. "The tide only allows one escape every 26 years. Tonight's the night." I ran across the bridge, the pendant burning against my skin. Behind me, the wet figures began to climb the embankment with unnatural speed, moving in that same fluid, gliding motion I'd noticed before. The second water crossing was a drainage culvert beneath an underpass, hardly more than a trickle, but apparently sufficient as the followers stopped at its edge, hissing as water vapor rose from their skin. I continued westward, thumb out whenever cars passed, but each vehicle was already full of soaking passengers who stared blankly as they drove by. My phone remained useless, displaying only static and occasional flashes of coordinates pointing back to Halibut Point. As afternoon faded toward evening, I spotted a bus stop ahead, a rural route that might take me beyond whatever influence controlled Rockport. The bus arrived precisely on schedule, empty except for the driver who nodded as if expecting me. Only after I'd settled into a seat did I notice water pooling around his feet, his uniform darkened with damp patches. Through the windshield, I could see we weren't heading west at all, but circling back toward the coast. When I confronted him, he simply replied, "No other destination tonight. Special service." His eyes, when he turned to look at me, reflected light like polished stone. I lunged for the emergency exit, fighting against the handle as the driver continued calmly along the route. The pendant around my neck glowed faintly now, creating a small dry radius around my body that the spreading floor puddles couldn't penetrate. I finally forced the door open as we approached a bridge over what appeared to be a reservoir. My third water crossing if I could reach it. Jumping from the moving bus, I rolled painfully on asphalt before scrambling toward the bridge's walkway. Headlights behind me revealed not just the bus, but a procession of vehicles, all converging on this point, all filled with wet figures. The bridge stretched nearly half a mile across open water, and I was halfway across when the procession reached its base. Every car door opened simultaneously, disgorging dozens of soaked residents who began marching in perfect formation onto the bridge. Among the crowd, I recognized Mike from the gas station, no longer my ally but one of them, his earlier assistants apparently a ploy to ensure I carried the protective pendant, likely a tracking device for whatever controlled these people. The pendant no longer burned but had grown ice cold, a miniature frost forming around its edges. As my pursuers closed the distance from both ends of the bridge, I realized with horror that the stone wasn't protection at all. It was a beacon, drawing these entities toward me with increasing urgency as midnight approached. In desperation, I ripped it from my neck and hurled it into the reservoir below. Rather than sinking, it floated impossibly on the surface, where it began to glow with increasing brightness. The water around it bubbled and churned as something massive rose from the depths, something that dwarfed the approaching crowd in scale and ancient malevolence. Through the churning foam, I glimpsed vast limbs and a surface that resembled weathered granite more than flesh. carved with thousands of the same crude symbols I'd seen at the quarry. As the massive form continued rising, the wet figures on the bridge dropped to their knees in unison, arms outstretched toward the water. Their synchronized voices began that eerie singing I'd heard at Halibut Point, but now I could distinguish words, not in English or any language I recognized, but somehow I understood their meaning. Last offering. Final vessel. Release us. The enormous entity breached the surface completely, revealing a roughly humanoid shape composed of what appeared to be living stone infused with bioluminescent organisms. Its face, a collection of crude carvings that rearranged themselves as it turned toward the bridge. At its core, visible through cracks in its mineral exterior, were human shapes, the original 26 quarrymen, fused into the creature's mass, their expressions frozen in a moment of transformation between terror and ecstasy. The creature's voice resonated through water, air, and solid matter alike. One more to complete the cycle. One more to set them free. It extended a massive limb toward the bridge, not reaching for me, but for its followers, who began convulsing as water poured from their mouths, eyes, and ears. One by one, they collapsed, the animating force leaving them as it returned to the entity in the reservoir. I realized with horror that they weren't just possessed. They were extensions of the creature itself, puppets controlled through the water in their bodies. As each one fell, the massive form grew more defined, more powerful. Walter was the last to collapse, his aged body crumpling as the water within him surged outward, forming a tendril that reached for me with terrible purpose. I scrambled backward, but found myself surrounded, the bridge now slick with the residual moisture from the fallen bodies. The pendant's glow intensified as the water tendril wrapped around my ankle, instantly soaking through my shoe and sock to contact skin. Cold spread upward through my leg, bringing with it visions of darkness and pressure and ancient stone chambers beneath the seafloor. I saw the quarrymen discovering something while digging, not water, but a prison of rock containing something that had been sealed away millennia ago. I saw their transformation as the entity infected them through groundwater, turning them into its first new vessels after eons of confinement. Most terrifying, I saw what it planned. Not just 26 replacements, but an exponential expansion once the cycle was complete, spreading through water systems to nearby communities, then cities, then beyond. Fighting through the invasive visions, I reached for the only weapon available, a roadside emergency flare from my backpack. The creature recoiled slightly as I ignited it, the brilliant red light and intense heat creating a momentary barrier against the water tendril. In that instant of confusion, I recalled Blackwood's journal and the entity's nature. It controlled water but was fundamentally mineral, its core structure crystalline like the granite it had been imprisoned within. Extreme heat might not destroy it, but thermal shock could shatter its structure. With water still creeping up my body, I fought my way to the bridge's electrical maintenance box and smashed it open with desperate strength, exposing the high-voltage connections inside. The entity sensed my intention, its water tendrils surging toward me with renewed force, enveloping me to my waist as I jammed the burning flare into the electrical panel. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. Transformer boxes along the bridge detonated in sequence, sending arcs of electricity through the water covering the roadway and into the reservoir below. The creature's scream vibrated through water and bone alike as electricity met its mineral body, superheating, then rapidly cooling its structure. Massive cracks appeared across its surface, releasing clouds of steam and the trapped souls within. I glimpsed their faces, first the quarrymen, then more recent victims, as they dispersed into the night sky like vapor, finally released from their watery prison. When emergency services arrived hours later, they found me barely conscious on the scorched bridge surrounded by 25 bodies, ordinary Rockport residents who'd been missing for periods ranging from days to decades, all apparently drowned despite being far from water when they collapsed. The reservoir yielded unusual fragments of mineral deposits containing unidentifiable organic compounds and trace elements not native to Earth's geology. Official reports blamed a combination of methane release from the reservoir bed and electrical malfunction for the incident, with mass hallucination explaining witness accounts of singing and walking drowned people. My van was eventually recovered from a beachfront parking lot near Halibut Point, its engine inexplicably filled with seawater and tiny creatures usually found only in deep-sea trenches. I sold it for parts and never returned to Massachusetts, but on foggy nights, I still hear faint singing, not threatening now, but grateful. 26 voices freed from stone and water, finally at rest after more than a century of being something neither living nor dead, and one voice deeper than the others, ancient beyond measure, not gone, but merely sleeping again beneath new layers of rock and earth, waiting for another excavation, another discovery, another cycle.